like to start telling you a bit about Kamal's life. So, Kamal Aljafari is an experimental documentary filmmaker. He was born in Ramla, Palestine. He has been living and working in several places and is now based in Berlin. He studied history and theatre studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and later was trained at the Academy of Media Arts Cologne in Germany. In 2010, he taught film at the New School in New York City, and from 2011 to 2013, he was the head of the directing program of the German Film and Television Academy. He has received numerous grants, among them the Sundance Institute in the US, the National Center for Cinema and Moving Image Grant in France, the Kunstfonds German Federal Fellowship, and the Kunststiftung NRW grant for 3 successive years. Among the prizes he has been awarded with are the Friedrich von den Berge Visual Art Prize of the City of Cologne in Germany in 2004 and the Art Medal of the State of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil in 2014. At the festival we had 2 of his films screened. Yesterday The Roof, he made in 2006, and today, well just before, Recollection, he made in 2015-16. Between them, he made Port of Memory in 2009 and short films, among them Balconies, also in 2009. His films have been shown at the festivals of Locarno, in Rotterdam, in Toronto and Marseille, among others, as well as in museums, including Tate Modern and MoMA. Well, so just very briefly, about our plan for today. So we decided to split the masterclass into 3 main sessions. So we have chosen 3 main topics, and maybe if we still have time, we will add 2 more. Let's see. So the first point will be on the political and aesthetic notion of visibility and invisibility. So we'd like to discuss which aesthetic strategies Kamal pursues in Recollection, but also in his other films, to shift borders between visibility and invisibility. In the second part, we'd like to talk about the techniques that Kamal uses in his work, so how he reuses other films and manipulates the images, how he makes use of new technologies to create new films, new images without filming on site, and also how he uses sound. So the second point relates to the Nakba focus of this year's festival, memory. So we'd like to talk about the role that Recollection and The Roof can play in contributing to the memory of the past. And we'd like to ask, to whose memory of the past? To the Palestinian diaspora, to the second generation of Palestinians living in refugee camps in the Middle East, to the Western audience. And if we have time, still have time, we'd like to talk a little bit about the influences on Kamal's work, like writers, theorists, maybe other filmmakers, and maybe talk a little bit about his new film projects, what he's working on at the moment. All right, so let's start.
Which question? The first one, the strategy one.
So maybe we can start with Recollection, the film that was just screened. With The Roof, we had a Q&A yesterday, and Recollection was just before the masterclass. So Kamal, here in Recollection, you shift the focus through manipulating the images that you use. Former out of focus and hence seemingly invisible Palestinians who cross the street in the background or look around the corner are reframed, centered. Within the film, fictional material becomes documentary material. You use Israeli and US-American fiction films and search for their unintentional documentary work. The images become witnesses, not only regarding people, but also regarding the city Jaffa. So could you maybe tell us more about this process of searching for film material to work with? How did you look at it regarding your approach of making something visible, not through filming on site?
Thank you so much for being here again in this beautiful day. You've chosen to come inside the cinema. So in fact, the last sentence you said describes the way I worked on this film, and in fact on the other films. It has been always a process of searching, of venturing. So when you see the film as it is today, it's not something that I planned. It's not something that I planned. So the project started almost 8 years ago. I grew up in Jaffa, and one experience that I carried with me for a long time was going back from school to my grandmother's house, and I see a group of children gathered, and I'm walking the street, and I see Lebanese and Hezbollah flags. Well, I didn't know. I knew about the Lebanese. I didn't know what was this other flag. And then I see a group of kids gathered, and they were very excited, and they were mentioning Chuck Norris. So this was the shooting that I saw, the actual filming of Delta Force 1, starring Chuck Norris. And I just waited with them, and I see the car, an old Volkswagen car, a van, with the name of my school on it, driving, and Chuck Norris opens the door and starts shooting around with his Uzi. So, as a kid, you don't understand what is actually the meaning behind all of that. And in 2000, many years later, in 2009, I was screening a film in London, at the London Film Festival. And I go to my hotel room. You arrive to the hotel room, you see this welcoming announcement on the TV, which is very disturbing. You have to change it. So I changed it, and I went to take a shower. I came out of the shower, and I see the exact scene playing on TV of Chuck Norris shooting in Jaffa. So I sat and I watched this film for the first time. In fact, I never watched it. And I was, throughout the whole film, I was very disturbed because I didn't want to see these actors. I wanted to see the city. Because this film was made in the early 80s, and you could see in the film many of the neighborhoods that don't exist anymore. And I could see many of the corners and places that I used to visit and walk through as a child. And for a long time, I was thinking, what could I do with these films? And finally, I had this idea, which costed me many years, of removing the actors from the foreground, because they basically stood in my way, right? So, the idea was to make a film with fiction material, and treat it as a documentary material, in fact, because these films, which were shot in as early as the 60s, were ironically the only documentation left of Jaffa. So these exact films, Israeli films and American films, which uprooted the Palestinians for the second time. First time in reality, as we all know it, and second time in fiction films. And in these fiction films, they didn't exist. You wouldn't see even any traces of the Palestinians. They simply didn't exist. So as you can imagine, it's very disturbing. You watch these films, which are in fact propaganda films, and they played a major role in shaping the Israeli identity as a nation, and using Jaffa as an evidence of history, of narrative in Palestine. Jaffa as a place with long history. I mean, you shoot in a neighborhood which is old, and you set your actors in a situation where the viewer obviously, unconsciously feels that they are coming from an old place with history. Obviously, this is wrong, because these characters were just inserted in the location which doesn't belong to them. Hence, this is the fiction of the whole project that we are talking about. These films were never shot in Tel Aviv. And you ask yourself why? I mean, Tel Aviv is the city which is in fact a big city, which is the main achievement of the Zionist movement. And in the 60s, Tel Aviv was already a big city, bigger than Jaffa, in fact. But none of these films were shot in Tel Aviv. So it wasn't really a coincidence, it was intentional, because Tel Aviv was a new city, it was a settler city. And if you set your fiction film in the city, it clearly becomes a settler's film. So Jaffa, is it working? Oh, okay. So Jaffa was the perfect solution. So yeah, I in fact, I didn't know about the cinematic activity of the Israeli cinema in Jaffa until I started, in fact, researching. I mean, I saw the shooting of Delta Force, but I didn't know about the other films. And it took me a long time, in fact, to gather them, because no one had ever made a study about the aspect of using Jaffa as a main film set for the Israeli cinema. And I discovered like almost 80% of the Israeli films made in the 60s and 70s were set in Jaffa. So I realized that I have a treasure of material, and I wanted to use it for my own narrative, to create my own narrative. So my first idea was, in fact, I started the project while having a fellowship at Harvard University at the Film Studies Center, which helped me a lot to find many of these films. And I used to use the cinema at the Harvard Film Archive in the evenings after they are done with their programming. The programmer of the cinema gave me the keys. He told me you can do whatever you want in the cinema. And I would project the films in the cinema at night and make pictures, film, take snapshots of details, basically as a tourist, in fact, who could only visit these places in the cinema itself, in films themselves. So it was a very long process, and at the end of this process I produced roughly 25,000 images of places. I was mostly interested in the beginning in places, but as it happens always, you discover much more than you think you are doing. And that's the magic of working in images. I discovered endless, really number of Palestinians who were in the films. They were just passing by or standing in the corner, and many of these people actually I knew. And one night I was working in the cinema and I played this film that I haven't seen before, and I see my uncle passing by. So you realize, in fact, that the memory of images is beyond anything we can imagine. I mean, I had, in fact, a very simple idea when I started the project, which was going back to the places which don't exist. And I found myself in a situation where there was so much more, and this was the challenge of making this project, you know, how to use this material in a way that I make justice to the richness of the material itself, and at the same time also to narrate what I want to narrate. So the project started as a photography project, and it was exhibited in some shows. And later on, I had the idea of making a film. Now, making the film was more difficult because it's easier to take pictures and exhibit them. And making a film, you need really a plan, if you want, a kind of narrative. And as it is in life, you know, when you are interested in something, deeply interested in something and emotionally involved in the subject, things start to happen accordingly. So if you're in love with someone, you will find her or his name everywhere you go, right? And with the material itself, you know, I started coming across writings, mostly actually writings, less films, which helped me a lot to find the right language to work on this film. And one of them was a short story of by Borges, the Argentinian writer. It's a very short story of 10 pages. It's called Funes, His Memory. I don't know if you know Borges, of course. So the short story is about a man called Funes, and this person, he falls off the horse. It's a tale, and he has a head injury. And as a result of that, he has the amazing talent, or curse if you want, to remember everything. So when I was looking at the images, at this material, I was thinking, okay, I mean, these images, they are beyond me. You know, I could recognize some places where my grandfather used to sit, where I would walk back to my grandparents' house. But there was much more than that. And I came to the conclusion that I should make a film which is about my memory, the memory of my grandparents, the memory of all the people that I found in the background, all these ghosts that were caught, in fact, in images. They were not supposed to be there. They just found themselves there. And this was the, if you want, the idea that I had while making the film. Once I started working in the film, I had this idea that it should be a film about someone who has the ability to go back and visit all these places that don't exist anymore. He has the ability to go back to the past. And at the same time, he is interested in film. He's interested in photography. So he is filming. So that was the kind of idea I worked with while editing the film.
Thanks a lot. So how many of you have been to the screening of Recollection? Almost everybody, right. So maybe we shall show something right now to give the comparison of the original material you were working with and then what you made out of it, or would you prefer to start with a clip of, well...
So maybe we play the clip from Port of Memory, where I'm using for the first time a scene from an Israeli film, from a film called Casablanca, made in 1972. It's an Israeli musical, the most successful Israeli film ever until today, in fact. And it's a kind of celebration of exiles of all the Jews who now live in Jaffa. Jaffa is their city. And this film was in fact widely distributed. When I was at Harvard, I found a print, 60mm print of this film in English. It wasn't dubbed in English. They recorded everything again. They shot the film twice, once in Hebrew and second time in English. So you can imagine the importance of this film in shaping public opinion. Because if you watch this film, and this film was really widely distributed in all American universities, you think, yes, Jaffa is a Jewish city, is an Israeli city. It has been always like that. So we can play.
Yeah, right. So let's please play the Port of Memory extract, and then we could maybe follow up with showing the original clip of Casablanca that you also use in Recollection. So have these three clips right now. So sure. Port of Memory, and then Casablanca, and then Recollection on Casablanca.
So you were mentioning, having studied at the Art Academy in Cologne, which was in fact really a great experience because we had one of the most important experimental filmmakers in the world, in fact, a Polish artist called Revjinsky. I don't know if some of you have heard of him. He made a film called Tango in 1982. And this film is a one-shot, 8 minutes long, where you see around 30 characters in different stages of their lives and from different parts of the city, moving from one room to another. And it's all in loop. And this film was really quite, for me, when I studied, surely, you know, when you study, you don't register things as you do later on, many years later. And that's the part that I relate to as being emotionally involved in a subject. You know, you start even remembering of things that you have seen 10 years before or 20 years before, and you realize they were so important to shape you the way you are today. And we are not coming from a void, you know, we come from we rely on things that we read, we see. And it's often the case that many years later, you come with an idea, okay, I want to make this film, and then you start thinking about it, and you remember a film that you saw 20 years ago. And it was very inspiring for me to have had this experience. So this film, as I mentioned, was made in 1972. It's called Casablanca, named after the main character, who's from Casablanca. He's a Mizrahi Jew. These films were most of the time about the impossible relationship, the tensions between the Mizrahi and the Ashkenazi Jews. And it's always a love story between a Mizrahi Jew and an Ashkenazi woman.
יש מקום רחוק אחרי הים, שם החול לבן הבית חם, שם השמש מאירה מעל את השוק הרחוב והנעל, הבית שם אחרי הים, אני זוכר בליל שבת הנר דולק לאבי, מביט בי ושותק. זה מקום רחוק, מקום נפלא, שם מכל חלון שומעים תפילה, בחצר הבית אם מעוות, בתנור חלון שבת, הבית שם אחרי הים.
I think we're going to see now this clip out of the original,
film? Okay.
the original clip, and then the film Recollection.
להתראות. ומלחמה הבאה.
כולם תמיד אומרים שאין כמותך הסבלן, אבל יורקים ישר בפרצופך הסבלן. מיום שבאת לעולם אמרו אתה לא בן אדם, תמיד צעקים קללות מכות בדם. הסבלן כך לא עושה איש מבוגר, תמיד רק כוח, הוא מתחמם על כל דבר, עושה לו מצב רוח. אז אל תצעק יומם בליל כבוד קדוש, ציפורת הציפורים שלך מתוך הראש.
The first clip we saw was in fact a citation I had in my own film, in Important Memory. And the reason I used that clip was that when I watched the film Casablanca for the first time, I was quite shocked when I saw this scene. Because in fact, this is my narrative. While he was singing in Hebrew, was my feelings towards this place. I was displaced, I was away. And the film is quite schizophrenic because, not my film, their film. Because the narrative of the narrative of the film is about this man who's a Mizrahi Jew. He's a Moroccan. That's why the film called Casablanca. He's coming from Casablanca. And throughout the whole film, this city is their city. It's his city. And around 40 minutes into the film, we have the crisis of the character. In fact, saying that this is not my place. I come from a place behind the seas, which is Morocco, in fact. So I don't think this was intentional. It's a kind of things that you can find in fiction films, and that's why fiction films are more interesting to work with, because they are working much more on the subconscious. Because when you work on documentaries, everything is planned, you have a theme, you have a subject, you kind of research, and in fiction films, you make this type of mistakes. So when I saw the clip, I was thinking, okay, I should use that for me, for my own narrative, because this is exactly what I feel about this place. So I decided to give it in Hebrew as it is, and then the part that where you see my uncle, in fact, replacing him. This was shot in Germany in a studio. Basically filmed my uncle in a green screen, and then I removed the Israeli actor and replaced him by my uncle. And this experience was actually quite was very touching, because I went to the studio and we shot it in Munich, and my uncle came and we worked in this studio for a couple of days. And when we were done with the shooting, we could see the results. We worked right after on the post-production, and he saw himself walking in the port, which don't exist anymore. And this was really a moment where I realized the power of cinema, of having a character being able to go back to places which don't exist anymore. I mean, usually what we do when we visit places where we come from, or Palestinians, when they become Canadians or French or British, one day they are able to go back to Jaffa. They go and visit the house if it is still existing, and they go for a swim, and they go to eat fish, and they take pictures. So here I was thinking, I can make it possible for everyone to go back. Any person. You don't have to go there. I can just put you in the image and make you walk, sit, wonder, and in fact, claim this place forever. Because when you go and visit, you know, it's a visit. You are there for a day, 2, 1 week. But in cinema, you can do something much more powerful. You are there forever. You can look at yourself again and again.
You can freeze.
Sorry?
You can freeze.
Exactly, and this is in fact the origin of cinema. I mean, when since we are in France, when André Bazin wrote about the origins of cinema, he spoke about the complex of money that we have, all of us, which is photography. Why people take pictures? Because we want to exist forever. We want to freeze time. And I think for myself, for me as a Palestinian, that was really an important moment where I realized that cinema is not just films. It's a country, in fact, that you can create and you can use as an escape from reality. That's why when people describe what I'm doing as a documentary, I'm always disappointed because I never saw myself as a documentary filmmaker. And I think in using already existing material, I'm trying to as well free myself from the documentary part and create something new out of already existing material.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. And it's very interesting to see how you changed the way of working from the roof to Recollection. So in the roof, you still make use of common documentary techniques like a voiceover, or at one point you make it through a text insert very clear that you filmed 2004 in Ramla, in Jaffa, in Jerusalem. And it's also very clear that the people you film is your family. So in your later film, in Recollection, all that is not the case. So we have just the manipulated, deconstructed and appropriated images. You wait until the very end, until the end credits, to give the audience a narrative in the form of a commentary that reminded me personally of someone giving comments while looking at his or her family photo album. So in the credits you name the people and you tell fragmentary anecdotes. So how did you decide to change this choreography of giving information to the audience?
Well, this wasn't really planned. I think it's simply a development you go through. With the roof, I was a beginner, and slowly I kind of lost interest in the truth that we all claim to have. Especially when you work on films about Palestine, you have a certain responsibility that you feel, even as an artist. Not only as a filmmaker, is to document and to keep things, to capture things. So in a way, you become, even if you make a fiction film, you find yourself making a documentary. And with Port of Memory, I kind of distanced myself from facts, and I was more interested in the poetry of daily life. The film again is set at my grandparents' house in Jaffa, and I was more interested in filming the way my aunt washes her hands or the way she is making the bed. I found this much more touching and interesting than explaining and making a film again about the Palestinian tragedy and all the hardships that people go through, which is true, but I didn't see that at that point. I really wanted to free myself from carrying the responsibility of explaining and documenting. I wanted more to be an artist, if you want, and I somehow, making Port of Memory, I didn't feel that I achieved it. I felt still I was caught into this situation. And with Recollection, I wanted to free myself entirely from this feeling, making a film which we don't know when we watch the film, where is this film set, where is this place? And it comes only at the end, with the end credits, which were in fact a result of a struggle I had when I finished working the film. I was thinking, okay, what kind of credits should I put for this film? Because I haven't shot this material. I mean, I did shoot it because I took pictures and I animated the background. And I was telling Iris today, you know, when I watched the film today, I think I made this film. I shot this film. Because every movement of the camera is a movement that I created in the computer. And finally, the movement of the camera and everything you see is a style that behind it is one person, the maker of this film. So the end credits, I didn't want to mention the films I have used for making my film, because they became irrelevant at some point. And I had this idea of mentioning the people, the places that you see in this film. In fact, when this is something we're going to talk about, the sound aspect. When I went to Jaffa to record the sound, this is the only thing that I did there. We were done, we recorded sound for almost 2 weeks, and the last day I felt quite, if you want, quite melancholic. I was sad leaving this place. And I got up very early in the morning. I went for a walk in Jaffa, and in my mind I wrote these credits. And I went back to the to where I was staying, and I wrote it down. And this became the end credits of the film.
Shall we maybe watch the end credits?
Oh yeah, sure.
We could? Yeah.
So it's actually the film that I should make one day. So it's not directly the film that you have seen with Recollection, because there are many scenes there. So that the end credits really are an example of the possibilities, the endless possibilities you have if you don't make films with a concrete plan, as people make films today, most people, where you have a script and you follow the script and there's a whole structure behind it that makes it really difficult for you to be free and get to such points while making the film. In fact, I like this idea of a film making itself. In fact, this was an example of a film making itself. And at some point when I was editing the film, I really lost control, because the film was imposing the language, the editing. And I was kind of led to make the film in the way it is today. And it's a kind of magic moments you have when you are engaged with material and you really working non-stop with material as such.
Are there already questions in the audience? So let's open up the space, and there are over there too.
Hello. I just have a question. I don't remember if I asked you already, but I was curious of how have you been able to use these films? Did you have to ask for copyrights and things like this, or the fact that you edited it and changed it completely allowed you to use them, or maybe they never knew about the fact that you used them, so this is the question.
Yeah, so before, when I started having this idea of making the film the way it is, I consulted with a lawyer in Germany. I'm a German, so. But, so yeah, I met with this lawyer and I told him about this idea. I really liked the idea a lot. And he told me, you know, all you have to do is change everything as much as you can. Make it impossible for the people who made this original films to recognize their own material. I told him, this is something I would love to do. So he encouraged me, in fact, to, you know, make all these changes. And, you know, in the film, there are many places in Recollection where I changed the colors. Like, you have this, I don't know if you remember, there's one scene, you see the interior of a house, of a Palestinian house. And the door was, in the film, in the Israeli film, was painted in black. And I took this clip, and it was in my editing, and at some point I thought, okay, I should change the color of the door. And I changed it to blue, which is the typical color of Palestinian homes in Jaffa. So in other places, you know, I could just, you know, because when an actor moves in a scene, if the camera is moving, it becomes really difficult to erase him and to reconstruct the background. So sometimes what I do, I would just take a stills from the scene. I remove him. It's very easy with Photoshop. All of you, you can, you know, most of you can do it. Most people can do it today. Just Photoshop, you can remove people. And if he doesn't really move, then I have to reconstruct the background, right? So I would just add, you know, if there was a window on his left, I will add another window next to him. So that's the moment where I thought, wow, you know, you can really create a city. And in fact, correct history. And this was something that I became more and more interested in, the ability of a filmmaker to rewrite history.
Yeah, and what I also found super interesting was the camera movements that you created yourself. So maybe could you tell us, how did you do this? Like this, how you created, generated this camera movement as if you were filming the images yourself, or actually did it, and how this relates to reclaiming cinematic territory, a phrase that you use describing your work. So,
you know, listening to my lawyer, I thought, okay, I have to create a new camera work within the frame, meaning that, okay, I'm taking this material, but I won't keep it as it is. I want to walk inside the image. So if you remember, in the film, there are many scenes where you see, you hear the person walking, and then he makes pans. And with After Effects, you can have the option of creating a data, meaning that I copied one pan, I just found it in the internet, and I could have the pan, every time you see a pan in the film, in Recollection, be in the same style. So in that way, the person filming, he is you know, as I said, he's a filmmaker and he has a style. He films in a certain way. When he does the zoom, he does it in a certain way. So when you watch the film, you have the feeling that it was made by one person. And this was the idea behind creating a new camera work inside the frame. And again, you know, this was a very important element for me to reclaim everything cinematically. Meaning I'm making the film that I wasn't able to make because of many reasons. And this is the time where I have the chance to make this film that I wasn't able to make. And it was really possible because of the technology we have today. I made this film at home, at my place in Berlin. So that's another aspect of this filmmaking, which is really very useful for people like us coming from the south with little money, and to make a type of, if you want, as I said today, for me this film has a science fiction aspect to it, because it's not a film about the past. It's not a film about the present. It's in fact an anticipation of the future. The future which is already now here. As I said yesterday, it's a place. It's a film about Aleppo of today, about Berlin in 1945, and it's about all catastrophized places and about the possibility of endless wars we are having ahead of us. In fact.
All right. So there are comments, questions.
I have a short question. Actually, thank you, because you didn't make like Godard, who was, when he said that like it's all about editing. You don't need to shoot. The film is all about editing.
This is what Godard said, yeah.
Yeah, he said it on an iPhone, but here we can see it.
Yeah.
Actually, the point for me, when I've seen the images and I heard you at the same time, yeah, there is this kind of time-space traveling in the images. And in a certain way, I felt, as public, I felt like, okay, you said that you just removed the characters to remember the place, but those who stayed, that you called who were not supposed to be here,
yeah.
Actually, I felt it's the opposite, that it's those who were supposed to be here, and you removed what was not supposed to be here in a certain way. But
yeah.
The point for me, did you feel like making these films is in a way or another, like, let's say, I don't have even the words for it, like a kind of a vendetta with a place where you had I want to speak about the Hebrew University period, like a vendetta with this institution in which you were obliged to grow up.
Well, for me, it was quite natural to go and study at the Hebrew University. I mean, it's not something that you think twice about, as a Palestinian growing up in Israel. But surely, the situation of Palestinians in Israel is quite unique in a sense that, especially coming from Jaffa, I always felt as an immigrant. And when I left Palestine, when I left Jaffa to study in Germany, you encounter people and they always tell you, how is it for you to live abroad for the first time? And for me, there wasn't really a difference, in fact. Because while being in Jaffa and also in Jerusalem, you are an outsider. You're an outcast, in fact. You're a ghost in your own country. That's why I identify myself with the characters, with the people that I found in the background. I'm one of them, in fact. And I grew up as one of them. And when I found my uncle in the background of one of these Israeli films, I was surprised and I wasn't surprised at the same time. This uncle of mine, he spent 25 years in a mental hospital. And I found him, in fact, in the films as I knew him. Because he would come back, visit my grandparents' house, over the weekend. Sometimes he disappears for months. And as a child, I was always wondering, where does he go? I didn't understand this ever, in fact. So I grew, you grow up and then you start, understanding things. But look how life is crazy, because I find him as a ghost, in fact, in someone else's film. And I end up using him for my own film. And during all this time that I knew him, I never filmed him. I never had any record of him. And he passed away, and I finally find him in this film. So that's again the idea of filmmaking itself. I haven't planned that, you know, it's just something that happens to you.
So are there any comments or questions right now? Anybody wants to intervene? Yes, please.
Thank you, Kamal, for this, to share with us this beautiful experience and interesting debate. I just want to ask you if it's possible to tell us the number and the names of the film, of the movies you used.
Well, there are almost, I used material from around 50 films.
50 films.
Yeah. A lot of movies, in fact. But they were mostly made in the 60s and 70s. I used some from the 80s, but mostly films made in 60s and 70s.
We could show you one more original clip that we brought, The Policeman, shall we?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
What we could also show is one of these scenes of Recollection, the Recollection 1, where you focus on a boy looking around the corner. So, not the uncle, but the boy, background.
Sure. So we should talk about the sound aspect, because, you know, this was the part that I recorded in Jaffa. And it was with two main ideas I had. The first one was, okay, this is a film about someone dreaming, and in his dream he is making this film, so he must be somewhere. So throughout the whole film you have the sound, in fact, of my bedroom in Berlin. Without me, I just went somewhere else, I slept somewhere else, and I recorded the sound of my apartment. And it was actually, I advise you to do it, in fact, because it's amazing what kind of sound exists when you are sleeping. It's something that you never think about, you never in fact hear, because you're sleeping. And I ended up using it really as a soundtrack, you know, throughout the whole film, with all the noises coming from neighbors from outside. You know, the cars driving become waves, in fact. And when you watch my film, you think it's actually they are cars, they're not waves. Recorded from my apartment in Berlin, and there's a storm, and it was actually a storm in Berlin. So that's the idea, you know, behind the soundtrack, where in fact everything is mixed up, you know. The person who I am today, the person that I think I am, making this film, and the other part is in fact the sound that I recorded in Jaffa. And I had this crazy idea that places free themselves from the present at night. So I would just go record sound from like 10 o'clock at night until 5 in the morning. It was an amazing experience, because true, you know, these places, when you go at night, they have something quite mysterious, as if they are really going back to themselves, to who they are. And if a shop has now, a Palestinian old shop has now a name in Hebrew, when you go at night, this shop starts speaking Arabic, and that's the kind of sound that I had like feeling for while recording in Jaffa at night.
And what
so
about the bombing sounds?
Sorry.
The bombing sounds.
This was a storm. I'm talking about it was a storm in Berlin. It was bombing sounds. And it ended up becoming like an explosion, because I'm using the images of an explosion of a building, which was in fact from Delta Force, starring our friend Chuck Norris. And the end of the film, they used real-time explosions for the film itself. So they had the free hand to use all buildings in Jaffa. The Tel Aviv municipality gave them a free hand to do what they want. It was an abandoned building, and it was a real-time explosion, basically producing cinematic violence, right? So the people that we see in the background here, these are the Palestinians that were not supposed to be there.
Ghosts.
And So I very much wanted to, in fact, use this, and I was disturbed by this man who's the policeman in this movie. So I removed him, and then I had to erase the subtitles. This was very difficult because I had to go frame by frame. The idea of credits is quite fascinating, because what you do with credits when you open a fiction film with credits is it's just the ultimate reclamation of the place, because you are not only shooting in this place, you are writing over the place. And many of the Israeli films shot in Jaffa, they open with beautiful images of the city with the Hebrew writing over these places. So that part of removing the titles was really very exciting for me to do, because again, I was rewriting history, right? So, you understanding? Some of you understand Hebrew? No. So the song says, since 10 years, I have been lost, and I wish I could turn back the clock. And in fact, when I watch this, when I see this clip, I always thought they are talking about me. So that's the idea behind these using already existing in art, they have the ready-made art, and this is the same in cinema. There's ready-made cinema. Now all you have to do is really to collect and to put together and make a new film.
Yeah. So I see we are already coming to this point we wanted to discuss regarding memory.
Okay.
So through your work with found footage in Recollection, you create new images that represent your personal memory of your hometown. And at the same time, you open up the material for a collective investigation and narration of Palestinians living in Jaffa, when you provide these manipulated yet documentary images to people. So I'd like to discuss how you intervene in the collective imaginary of Tel Aviv Jaffa, how the film produces a counter-narrative to the dominant historical narrative of Tel Aviv Jaffa. And please feel free to add your remarks, comments, questions.
It's everything I was saying all the time. But working with Recollection was quite challenging, because when I was telling people about the project, then always I'm encountered with the question, okay, you will have a voiceover, you will tell all of that. And for some reason, I really rejected this idea of a voiceover, because I felt that I will be imposing my own memory, my own narration as a person over these images. And I didn't want to do it. I trusted the images. I was really, I trusted the images that I created after removing the actors, because I felt these are my images. I made these images, and I could see the place as I remember it, as I imagined it as well. And after starting working on the editing of the project, I went to Jaffa and I printed postcard-size images from the material. And I was showing these images to my mother. And one of these images was the one where you see the blue car, if you remember, in the film, which comes again and again. So the reason why I took this image, and there was an Israeli actor actually there, that I removed so I could see the entire place without him. And the reason why I took this image was that at the corner, it was the place where I used to sit with my grandfather. And on the right of the image, it was the house of my grandparents that you don't see. And when I was watching the film, I was waiting for the camera to pan, to move, but it never did. So I was showing her this image, and I was telling her, yeah, this is where my grandfather used to sit with his transistor radio, her father. And then she recognizes the car, which I never thought about. I mean, the car was there. I didn't know. Okay, there was just a car standing there, and it turned out that she referred to the car. That this car was the car of her relative. His name is Ahmed Faraj, that I never heard about him before. And this was his taxi. He was a taxi driver. And Ahmed Faraj was married to a Jewish woman, and he had a family. He had 2 kids, in fact, living today in the daughter living in Jaffa and the son living in Tel Aviv, that I never heard about. And I had to, make this film, in fact, to remove this Israeli actor and start all this project. So I discovered something that was totally new to me, and that he was taking her to El Arish because part of my mother's family, they went to Lebanon, Syria, and the other part they went to Egypt. Most of the people of Jaffa, they left Jaffa through the sea.
Or to Gaza.
Or to Gaza as well.
Faraj is in Gaza.
Sorry?
Faraj, there are Faraj.
Yeah, he has relatives in Gaza as well. So, and he has actually a brother. He had a brother in Lebanon. That he never saw again. He passed away in Lebanon. So here's one example of one photograph, that has so much memories. And then I exhibited this same photo in Beirut at the Dar al-Nimr Art Center. This was a year ago. And there was this man who looks at the image, and he recognizes the window of the house of his family in Jaffa. No. And every time I'm surprised how much memories, in fact, one image has. It's endless. One day someone else is going to look at this image and find something else that I didn't think about. So what do you do here as a filmmaker, as a creative person? Do you impose your narrative, your narration, or you let the images exist as they are? And that was really the challenge I had, which wasn't an easy one, because it's really difficult to make this type of film. I would have had really easier time, maybe even a wider audience, if I had a voiceover saying things. But I resisted that, and I felt that these images should really exist as they are. And in a way, I mean it when I say, if you're tired and you want to fall asleep while watching this film, do. You can wake up and look again at these images, and there's nothing wrong about it. So it's really a different way of understanding of cinema, of what we do, what we can do with material, and how we watch films. Are we watching films to stay awake or to dream? And in this case, I wanted really to watch a film and let you dream, wonder. Your dreams might meet my dreams, might not, but it's really an experience.
Are there any questions, comments?
You talked about the photograph in Lebanon and the guy recognizing this window of his house. And and this whole question of the photograph having loads of different memories, in many senses, it may not have been his house. Although it doesn't matter that it wasn't his house,
it's true,
because he invested in the photograph the memory of his house. So of course that enables some form of material culture to then resonate, in people's lives. But then you said you didn't want to impose your own narrative. But in the film, inevitably, because you're editing, you're reconstructing, you're creating something that is, I don't know how long it is, 70 minutes long, you are making a narrative. So And I have to say, I'm really sorry I missed the beginning because I hadn't arrived. So I watched the end of the film, and then when I saw the kind of the recollections that you put at the end, I kind of felt that would have been so amazing to have read that at the beginning or in the middle, because it gives the audience a way into thinking about how you're thinking. And as an audience, you're always trying to work out what the artist has intended, even if you don't think the same.
Yeah. Well, trust me that I have tried many things.
Okay.
And, you know, when making this film, I spent so much time, you know. I did try to put the credits, part of them, at the beginning. And then I watched the film, and I watched it a couple of times. It didn't work. And I did try as well to have it somewhere in the middle. It worked better, in fact. But finally, I decided to have it the way you have it in the film. There was something quite simple, if you want, a kind of proto-cinema that I was really more interested in while working on this film. Just let the images somehow talk to each other, and I insist on that yes, they create their own narrative. I do have a narrative, but this narrative is not obvious. It's something that you can imagine with me, you can guess. And if I had put the end credits at the beginning, I probably would have, you know, imposed on you a certain narrative, a certain information. You know, when you make this kind of films, you struggle with all these questions, you know. And finally, since I'm making the film for myself, and I wasn't thinking about a certain audience, I was really making the film for myself. I ended up making these decisions. Some people, you know, think that I should have done it differently, and I still have doubts about parts of this film. But you know, these doubts and ideas, I should put them in a new project. Because, you know, sometimes I have these crazy ideas, I should go back and re-edit this film, which I shouldn't. It's going to open a, you know, Pandora box of making a new film, you know, because, you know, you change, so your aesthetic changes, and, you know, what you thought is beautiful and great 2 years ago is not anymore today. So, yeah.
Yeah, the way it is edited now, it's also like it leaves you, it leaves it open to the spectator to reread the images, to first see the images with like not really knowing how to read them, and maybe try to find a way to read them, and then when you read the end credits giving this narrative, you remember these images and you add this layer to the images. So there are this is something very rich to me, that within this experience of watching the film from beginning to the end, you have these several layers of reading and rereading. And
you know, I have another uncle. I have a lot. My voice is loud, so I don't need a mic. So I have another uncle who's a fisherman, in fact, and I showed him the images. He was the one who I'm quoting here, who said to me, wow, a picture lives longer than a human being. He's a philosopher, in fact. I never thought about it. And, you know, really, when you look at images, you know, they live longer than us. And that's the power of images, and that's the power of cinema, which you know, has, as I said, endless memories. And I agree with you completely. Whether this person really, the window that he sees there is his grandparents' house or not, doesn't matter. I love the story. Yeah, that you can come up with such an idea. You look at an image, you know, made by me, not by me, by someone else, an Israeli who shot there, and it's traveling to Beirut. And the Palestinian from Beirut looks at this image and he says, "This is the window of my grandparents' house." And that's the, these are moments where I'm happy to experience. Yeah.
So yesterday I have seen the roof, and I was fascinated by this obsession with the location, and this way to discover in multiple ways Jaffa, and so you have invented a story of a teacher of a car driver to explore in another way the location, and so with the film of yesterday, I was telling myself, tomorrow what he will do with this obsession with the location.
So you now
so today
you were not disappointed.
So we see the obsession with the location. For example, this relation with the location, by going in Jaffa and going in the road and going multiple times and repeating the same things with obsession. So I was fascinated by this thing. The second thing is the decolonizing the picture, the film, by erasing the actor, by erasing the subtitle, all these things, and you have to think about the virtual realities using all this scene that are cleaned in virtual reality. So you add another layer on the work that you have done by cleaning all the films and put in another story. The last story that you have put in the end of the film, turn it by using the virtual reality process. You have think about that?
Yeah. Well, this could take us to ideas and one of the projects I'm working on, which is a virtual reality project. Because when I made this film, I didn't know much about virtual reality, because I think if I had used the virtual reality making this film, it would have been even more powerful. Because with virtual reality, what you do, you have a complete experience of being in a space, meaning that you can turn around, you can look at the sky, you can look at the ground, you can walk. You as a viewer, you can walk into the image, and this is something that I would like to work with, but this time using the archival footage or already existing footage only as one part of the narrative of this work. And again, the power of image making is that you have endless possibilities today. You had in the past, but today even more, it's more accessible. That you can add other places, invent new places, and put them together and create a new experience, which is the country I'm talking about, the cinematic territory I'm talking about, creating a new country for people to exist, to love, to dream, to walk around, to wander. And that's one way of dealing with the situation we have as Palestinians, as well as Syrians today, going through the war in Syria, having experienced destruction of their country. I think with virtual reality and many other places, when in Libya and throughout the whole Middle East, and in the past in Lebanon, I think there is a necessity, a human necessity of working with images, a kind of post-traumatic exercise we do to exist, to recover. And I think with cinema we can do a lot And I think that's the time for us to explore and to cross all boundaries that exist within cinema. What was the first part?
About the obsession with.
Well, it's not an obsession. It's you know, in the case of Recollection, since I had this idea that it's a dream, and what happens in dreams, you know, dreams, they don't make sense. You know, you keep going back and again to the same thing. You kind of connect things which are not connected, but they are connected in your subconscious, and they don't make sense. And you wake up in the morning and you start thinking, wow, what was that? Why I've been there to this place, and then I meet this person that doesn't belong to this place. And that's the way I thought about editing this film.
Yeah.
That since the dream shouldn't make sense, the editing shouldn't make sense. I could really move from one place to another. And finally, you know, when you go through the process of editing the film, things become natural and they make sense as a film. So it's really up to you as an editor, as a filmmaker, and this film is made in the editing entirely. How to exercise your power to narrate, to rewrite, and to wonder. And I see myself as a collector. In fact, you know, I like to collect things. In this case, I collected these images. And at some point, you know, it took me years. In fact, I started working on this project in 2009, and for over 5 years, I had all these images. I didn't know what to do with them. I showed some of them in exhibitions, and it took me a really long time to come with the idea that I should be making a film with them. I think it came as well from a place where I wanted to make a film. I didn't have money to make a film, and this was a cheap way of making a film. So, yeah.
I just want to know where all the rushes for these films
There are several.
The rushes for the original films. Can you imagine what a resource that would be?
Yeah, that's another project. You know, while I was watching these films, collecting these films, I felt I became an expert of the Israeli cinema. Maybe this is something I could use in my career, you know, lecturing about Israeli cinema. But
the nostalgic songs actually was a serious thing for me. Like
nostalgic?
The importance of those Mizrahi nostalgic songs is very powerful in a certain way.
Well, that's a part that I'm referring to as the subconscious power of fiction cinema.
Yes.
Because subconsciously, you know, these characters who were supposed to play the role that was imposed on them from these directors who were extremely politically motivated and Zionist, because they were really creating films which shaped the idea of the Israeli nation, that we are a nation and we belong to this place. And you see, this place is very old. You know, when you film someone, a couple, and behind them is an old house, you obviously think that this is, you know, they come from this place, this is their place, they have history in this place. History/narrative, you know, because having history means that you have narrative, which they didn't have. So the melancholy that you see in some of the songs, because many of these films are musicals, they are coming from the Mizrahi part, the Oriental part of people mostly coming from Morocco, who were actually unhappy. They suffered really much more than the others. Being a part of this project, they were used for the Zionist project, which was a white, European project, and they were just used to make this project, you know, succeed. And so anyway, the songs that we have in many of these films, they have this melancholy kind of feeling to it, which is related, this is my interpretation, to their displacement. And you know, many of these Mizrahi communities, they were brought and put in Palestinian cities in places where it reminded them actually where they come from. So they came from Morocco, they put them in Jaffa, in Ramle, in Haifa. Yeah.
In 2000, when Israel withdrew from the south, my aunt, who was living in Ayman Helwi, along with half of Lebanon, we all went down to the border because it was still possible to do so, and people were going down in buses, and kids and old people and everyone. It was a big party to go and stand at the border and look at the mountains of Palestine, because they couldn't do that. We couldn't do that for years. And I remember my aunt saw a bit of red on top of a hill, and she said, "Oh my God, that's your grandfather's water tank." And she was talking about the water tank for the next months and months, because she saw a bit of red on top of the hill. But I can't even describe the emotions of people just standing and looking. So if you bring all these images, oh my God.
I mean, it's an ongoing project, you know. It's the type of film when you make this type of film like Recollection, you cannot. You think you can spend the rest of your life doing only that, because there's so much work to do, and you have to make really very difficult decisions. You know what you do next, right? I mean, you stop here and you go back to make a normal film, you know, where normal people shot in normal places. So you can really do a lot with this, these methods that I use here in Recollection, and you can apply them to any place today, in fact. I mean,
I'm curious if you have ever thought of applying this your technique in this project to other places that have been colonized, for example, and where we have a lot of images coming from the colonizing countries, and where the people don't have their own memories and images, but only see it through the filmmakers that were French, for example, in Algeria, or it could be the same with the British in India and things like this. It could be really interesting to apply this idea to other places.
Well, in fact, you know, when you travel with the film, you always meet people that tell you, this film reminds me of my country. And, you know, I was screening the film in Buenos Aires, and there was a South African man. And he told me, this film is so much about my hometown in South Africa. But I did think about, you know, places that I wanted to visit, and periods in life that I didn't have access to, like, for example, New York in the 60s and the 50s. And I could do the same, use the same technology, and you know, remove the actors if I want to remove them, or keep them if I want to keep them, and exist within the images, you know, insert my actors in the images, make them live in this period. So really, there are really endless possibilities to work with this technology. And I think cinema is old enough to be reused now. And I really have difficulties to convince myself to shoot, because I think we already have shot so much, and we have done too little with the material we have. There are, in France here, there are thousands of films, and these are really treasures that can be reused and re-edited, and you can create a new narrative. And that's the power of you know, the memory of images that we haven't really completely explored, because we move on, you know, we make another film, and there's you know, industry patterns existing that impose on us that, right, not to reflect, to continue. And there are so much material archives that needs to be studied. I mean, today, like almost 40 years after the beginning of the films by the Palestinian Revolution, today people are making films about using this material and making new films with this material. So imagine, the amount of work we have. That's why I'm saying, if you think about it, you can see that you can spend all your life working with already existing material.
Mm. Yeah, well, maybe to relate the notion of memory to the notion of common audiovisual heritage, film heritage as part of collective memory. So regarding Palestine, we're confronted with a lack. It was not possible to establish something like a film industry or infrastructure for independent filmmakers. Also, there is the problem of the loss or lack of archives. Thinking, for example, as you just mentioned, the revolutionary militant filmmaking of the Palestinian Cinema Institution in the 70s. So regarding Recollection, you once said that it is no archival film for you. For me, it is. It creates not only images that show the historical Jaffa and its Palestinian inhabitants, but also kind of an imagined archive. So maybe would you like to comment on this, and maybe to close regarding your new projects? Yesterday you mentioned how they were working towards the future more than
I like the definition you came up with, imagined archive. Maybe this is closest to what I think. But I was saying it's not an archival film because it's not an archival film the way we understand archival filmmaking, the way we have been making it in the region. In fact, mostly in Lebanon, there is a rich experience of archival films in Lebanon, which was the result of the post-Civil War. There are many amazing Lebanese artists who had worked with archival and footage until today, in fact. And this is almost finishing now in Lebanon. But in relation to the question of the archive, again, the experience of being a Palestinian in 48 in Israel is that you don't have any education or any place to go to look at your history. So when I studied at school, the history lessons, it was the history of the Jewish people. So I know a lot about the history of Jewish people, and we had Hebrew classes, and we read all the Hebrew poetry. I don't know if you know some of this, Jabotinsky and Rahel. And I had an Israeli teacher. At some point, she was so embarrassed about what she's teaching us, and she was telling us, "It's like Mahmoud Darwish." So she wanted us to develop some kind of interest in this material, empathy. So it's like national poetry. Of course, this was a colonial poetry. So in the case of working on Recollection, I felt I'm creating my own archive. It's a personal archive. And I still have so much material that I think I should use. I don't know what to do with it. So working with collecting and having all this material is really somehow a responsibility that you have, and I have to think all the time, okay, what should I do with it? I'll tell you another story. 10 years ago, the car of it's a funny story, the car of my sister, which is parking in front of the house, was the Windows car was broken almost once a week, and my father would go and fix it. At some point, he bought a camera, and he filmed the car for 1 month. So a couple of years ago, I went back home, and my sister is telling me about the story that my father filmed the car, and he eventually caught this person who was just a crazy guy. And I look at this material, VHS, surveillance camera, And my father wanted to catch this man, but he filmed the life of my family for entire months, going from the door to the car. And I look at this material and say, wow, this is an amazing film. I mean, I look at it and I could really study the life of my family. You know, I'm not living there, so for me this is exciting to look at. An entire month, you know, when my mother's leaving, when my sister's leaving, when my father's coming, when he's waking up in the morning, he's the first one to go to look if the window of the car was broken or not. And when the car coming to pick up the children to the school, you know, everything was happening in front of this camera. So, you know, all of that makes you think, okay, you know, why should I create, you know, everything is there, just put a camera and wait long enough to capture life. And this is all what you have to do, you know, as a filmmaker. Sorry?
This is a fisherman mentality.
Yeah, and this is a project that I would name my father's video. So, thank you.
All right, so thanks a lot. I know there is more comments, but maybe we can continue the discussion outside the cinema because time is over.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.